Hello, my name is Jackson Ryder, and today I'll be presenting a brief history of Armenia and the consequences of its conflicts. Um, I I am Armenian. I am of Armenian descent. My great grandmother was 2 years old when she and her family fled from Armenia to Egypt in 1915 during the Armenian genocide, and so Armenia is very holds a very deep place in my heart, and I care a lot about the country and Western Asia. And I it's hard talking about this topic in general, but I'm happy to share about the history of my culture and what's going on today and what people are facing, the issues people are facing today. So the earliest 20th century was marked primarily by World War One, new borders, and the Armenian genocide. Armenia fought on the Allied side against the Ottoman Empire and lost significant territorial land. They were promised um, historical ties. They were promised land that related to their historical ties. Armenia has been around for thousands of years, and so their territorial claims have changed throughout the centuries, but they were um, promised larger amounts of land, and they were not granted that by either Wilson and the Soviet Union. Millions died as a result of the Armenian genocide, along with hundreds of thousands of people in World War One and Two. Most people fled to either California in the U.S. or Russia. There's lots of Russian Armenians to this day. I believe half of the diasporic Armenians are in Russia or the United States. Um, the populations have never really recovered beyond what they were in 1913, 1914, 1915, the early 20th century. Some villages, some towns have never recovered. They've never got back to their original 20th century populations. Armenia as a whole has barely recuperated its population, and this has led to devastating consequences. The Armenian genocide is something that, while officially started in 1915, um, really starts in the late 1800s with Turkish nationalists, primarily the Young Turk Party, and their anti-Armenian rhetoric. When they came to power, they deported and killed roughly 1.5 million Armenians. Though this statistic is not agreed upon by historians. Some people say it's around 600,000, 800,000. Some people say it's as high as 2.4 million. But the most common number you'll hear is either 1.2 or 1.5 million. This doesn't include the hundreds of thousands of Assyrians or Greeks that were also killed during the time of the Armenian genocide. Um, to this day, the Armenian genocide is not acknowledged by many countries. The U.S. It's hard to say because depending on the year and depending on the presidency, is either acknowledged or is promised to be acknowledged as a campaign promise. But I don't think this matters. I mean, this does matter. This is a great matter of importance to Armenia because many diasporic Armenians, we really don't want we want acknowledgement for the atrocities that took place for us and the other ethnic groups. Um, I don't think many Armenians really care for any other reparations besides acknowledgement. This is not a common sentiment. I mean, this is a common sentiment among most Armenians. We just want acknowledgement, um, especially in regards to the Turkish government who committed these atrocities. To this day, the Turkish president or prime minister Erdogan does not acknowledge the Armenian genocide, And when they do acknowledge the events of the Armenian genocide, they usually say um, it was not inevitable, but it was going to happen, or there's this whole type of rationalization that occurs. Um, let's see. But by the end of 1923, most of the Armenian population was gone, around 90%. The atrocities are horrible, horrific. I didn't include any photos because they're so graphic. There's photos of just skulls um, and skeletons just surrounding the desert. It, when you really dive into the history, it's really disgusting, horrific. Words don't even describe how horrible it is. Um, Continuing on, after World War One, Armenia was um, annexed by the Soviet Union. And to quote the leader of Armenia at the time, there wasn't much resistance because the people were tired. They had faced a genocide, they had faced constant wars, they had faced discrimination. They were tired. They were tired. When you're faced with so many when you're faced with so many things of this nature, you want a break. And so many Armenians were socialists and they wanted um, to be included in the USSR to have further power. Although for a time, Armenia did briefly have its freedom after roughly a year of being annexed into the USSR. They were free for several months, but then they were attacked and then annexed again by the USSR. The USSR and Russia were one of the primary allies of Armenia until the late 2010s, with the conflicts of the Nagorno-Karabakh region. And to this day, there's a lack of support from Russia, most likely due to the ongoing Ukraine war. Let's see. I'm sorry. This topic is like really hard to present sometimes and just talk about. So excuse my stuttering. It's sometimes it brings me to tears. It's just a very gut wrenching topic. Armenia was very significant in World War II, although it doesn't get much recognition. There were over 600,000 Armenians participating in the army. There was around 10,000 Armenian women in the army. They were on the Allied sides again, as they were a socialist state. They were fighting under the Red Army. Yeah, there's significant deaths again. And this is another reason why the population hasn't recovered. After World War One and the Armenian genocide, the population went down. World War II again, hundreds of thousands of deaths. And so there's just so many losses of life on the Armenian side. So we get to the Nagorno-Karabakh wars and conflicts. It's a more recent conflict, though. This stems from the result of the Soviet annexation of Armenia and Azerbaijan. They never really settled border disputes, and because they were part of the same entity, and so once the USSR dissolved, this led to conflicts in the region. Artsakh, which is a primarily Armenian, ethnically Armenian region, wanted to leave Azerbaijan and voted to leave, though they were met with armed conflict. And this is an ongoing conflict, even though it ended several years after it started in 1988. There's just been constant clashes, over the years, and this is still an ongoing issue. This border dispute has never been solved, and even with outside influence, there's no real resolution. They say now that there are roughly 50 to 1,000 ethnic Armenians in the region, when there used to be roughly 120,000. Yeah, so 100,000 Armenians have left. And in the next slide, I'll show you a video of the people leaving Armenia. The Soviet Union wanted Armenians to flee from the region. And we should also mention, I should also mention that in the region, there are conflicts not only on Artsakh, but also villages in Armenian control and villages in Azerbaijani control of the opposite ethnicity. And so while it is Artsakh, there's other places that are within other controls. If you look at the borders of Armenia and Azerbaijan, they're not great. There's this land separated. I forget the term in geography, but there's a Azerbaijani land sandwiched between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The borders were also blockaded for a while, for I believe 8 months, without access to Artsakh to Armenia, and lacked water, medicine, food, and crucial supplies. They were really struggling, and this was hardly talked about in mainstream news in 2020, especially with the pandemic. But still, even now, the conflicts are still under talked about. You don't hardly hear about them. One school teacher said that I would often find bullets on our balcony, and when they were shooting, I would stuff cotton in my daughter's ears so she wouldn't hear it. If shooting took place during school hours, we would take the children to an underground shelter and play games and music for them. This is gut-wrenching as a prospective teacher. I want to be a teacher, and hearing about this is horrific. It's a horrific thing to bear witness to. And so here we see the region of Artsakh. We see the Armenians leaving Artsakh to Armenia. And we see the borders of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Iran. The border conflicts are obviously a long-standing thing, but it seems to really have gotten worse after World War I and II, with the Allied powers kind of carving out the region. And so we also see the neighboring villages inside each other's territory. So what are the lasting effects of conflicts in Armenia? Mostly we see depression, anxiety, and PTSD, not only in Armenian soldiers, but also in the civilian populations. For many Armenians, a relative that is in the military is not too far distant from them. And another thing we see is that many soldiers who have died are often from poor families. We see a lot of Armenians of wealth making bribes so that their children are not included in the war, or are stationed farther away from the conflict. And so the people that are on the front lines are often from poverty. We also find that a third of the population is below the poverty line, and is living on just dollars a day, tens of dollars a day. The mean salary is roughly $400 US. And right now in Armenia, that's not enough to pay for a studio apartment or studio living. There is lots of hopelessness, indifference, loneliness, and even aggression. One study sites with domestic violence going up in the community. Armenia also has very traditional gender roles, and it suffers from a lack of mental health and healthcare in general. They do not have a lot of resources that other countries have. Many of the transition from a socialist to a capitalist economy was marked with many oligarchs stealing and capitalizing on this transition, with there being a large wealth disparity. I believe over 50% of Armenians are living below the poverty line. And it says 23% of Armenians today are living below the poverty line. Let's see. And it varies on year to year. This is a result of the 1988 Spatak earthquake, the Soviet Union collapse, and the geopolitics, increasing rent, and also the refugees coming in. I mean, there's so many people, and already there's not enough resources to go around, and so it's hard to navigate this. All in all, Armenia has suffered a lot in the 20th century and the 21st century, and I hope that it gets better. We can only hope, and we can only support as much as we can. I wish I could give you a list of actions to support, but it's a rough situation, and there's not much we can do except for vote, and vote and share this with our governments. Thank you for watching this video. It's a tough watch, I understand, and I thank you for watching all of this. It means a lot, being able to share my culture and history with someone. Thank you.